I came of age in the late 70s and early 80s. Let me say up front, that was a time with undisputably the best popular music, namely rock and roll. If it weren't so, why would we find that music serving as the soundtrack for all the Shrek movies? Second disclaimer. Give me some Creedence Clearwater Revival with their Bad Moon Rising, and I'm glad for Led Zeppelin to take me to Sweet Home, Alabama. Now that I've highlighted my musical preferences, I would ask you to take note of the seismic shift in worship music over the past 40 years. For the most part, congregational hymn singing has gone the way of the slide rule and the pocket calculator, something only for nerds. Congregational hymn singing has been replaced with something perceived much cooler, namely amped up praise bands. These praise bands are trying their best to be baptized versions of the rock and roll bands of my generation. If you're going to play in Texas, you got to have a fiddle in the band. And if you're going to be a mega church, you got to have an electric guitar and a rock band. In the 1970s, the musical group Bread released the song Guitar Man, and I'm borrowing their lyrics to describe that seismic shift in churches. The Guitar Man, he will steal the show. He will steal the show, and the congregation will be giving their attention to him and not to God. Instead, their adoration and applause are for the Guitar Man and for his backup female singers, who are always in their 20s or trying their best to look like they're 20-something. Week after week, he puts on a show to draw in the adoring fans. However, this Guitar Man is not young and hip forever. Sooner or later, the glorious lights above will begin to flicker, the sound of worship will dim, and the crowds will thin. And the Guitar Man will move on to his next venue. Take note, the cool kids will move on, and someday the Guitar Man leading the worship will be a bygone fad and declared so uncool. In my lifetime, we have traded the hymns of our forefathers for cheap choruses. Many of those songs needed to go, such as the Battle Hymn of the Republic and That Little Brown Church in the Vale. We have replaced those old hymns with homoerotic Jesus songs, with never-ending choruses, all being pumped out by the likes of Bethel Church. To prove they are homoerotic Jesus songs, just remove Jesus' name and replace the name with your current lover, and likely the song goes. The praise band sings these highly emotionally charged songs, and the men with any amount of testosterone rightly feel awkward. Those men will either take their masculinity and leave the church, or they will learn to put on their best version of femininity and sway with the songs. If anyone does leave the church, you never know it, for the singing is just as loud because the praise band is amped up. As the praise band is busy telling us to love Jesus, the church has forgotten their rich musical heritage. I am not speaking of songs written in the 17th or 18th century by a bunch of white European males. I know, that is so wrong to the wokester mindset. We have become so focused on getting butts in seats, we keep an eye on the top 40 popular praise songs and make sure we give them to the audience what they want. Yet, do you see what has happened? In earlier times, worship was offered to please God. Now, worship caters to the tastes of the sensitive seekers. No longer do we have congregants offering worship to please God. Instead, those butts and seats are seen as consumers, and we give them what they want. If we do not give them what they want, they will go somewhere else. Instead of worshiping God, offering him what pleases him, many churches are slaves to the tastes of their consumer-minded congregants. Let us return to worship to something that pleases God and not man. Guess what? We know what pleases God. It is the Psalms, filled with their messianic promises and various war chants. This is a rich musical heritage that the church has abandoned. Let me encourage you to put away those lame pietistic hymns of yesterday, focusing on walking alone in the garden with Jesus. Also trash those modern-day choruses that are a mile wide and inch deep. You know, the ones that have 7 words that are repeated ad nauseum. The church needs to embrace the Psalms and then sing them as a congregation. At first, it will be awkward, for generations of congregants do not know how to sing because they've only learned to sway with the upbeat music blaring at them and play like Milli Vanilli, doing their best lip sync to the words of the song. Churches need to replace their employed baristas, you know, the ones serving lattes in the foyer each Sunday morning, and then go and hire some musically talented people to train the congregants to sing. As the Psalms are mastered, then use them as the measuring stick for evaluating older hymns and any new songs. If they measure up in theological content and tone of the Psalms, then hardly sing them as a congregation. Big Eva, with their mega church model, has done well to sell out the concert hall. If you have any doubt, look down towards Houston Way and see what Joel has got going on. We are told a parent will be known by his children, and teachers by their students. The mega churches with their multimedia extravaganzas, they are producing lukewarm Christians at best. By experience, I can tell you that raising children singing the Psalms around the dinner table and in church will produce sharp arrows that are ready to war against God's enemies and keep them from entering the city gates. You know, those places of power. As you consider music, what will we find in heaven? Will the archangel Michael be doing his best Eddie Van Halen imitation, performing those guitar solos to Maze All? I think not. Instead, we will find saints offering worship to God that pleases him. There will be no pseudo-celebrities performing. Instead, there will be a whole host of saints singing robustly. God will be at the center of attention, not some guy in skinny jeans or a group of 20-something women swaying in their miniskirts, providing backup vocals and eye candy. The church has done a bad imitation of the pop culture for too long. Let us trade in our faddish rock and roll songs and return to the genre that is fitting for worship of God. First-time attendees may not get the meaning from the deep psalms or the meaty hymns, but the saints of God will grow in wisdom, even if it takes a lifetime for them to master them. For too long, our church music has been junk food, easy to digest, that puts no meat on the bones. Like Esau, we've sold our rich musical heritage for popular pot of bean stew. And all we have to show for it is gas. Learn to like what God likes. Train your soul and know that this takes time and work. Sing the Psalms. Sing similar songs. Find a church that is doing this, and soon you will find yourself immune to the popular trends of the day that seek to take you captive. Give it some time, and soon you and your children will be shaping culture, not doing a bad imitation of the world around you. Let me close with a charge and an interesting tidbit and a recommendation. The charge. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century was powered by people of God who had returned to the preeminence of Scripture in their lives versus tradition. One manifestation in these Protestant churches was them embracing congregational singing of the Psalms. If you want reformation of our weak and effeminate churches of our day, then embrace the Psalms. Now, an interesting tidbit. The first book published on American soil was the Bay Book of Psalms for Singing. As our founding fathers sang the Psalms, they were shaping generations to come that would know God's war chants and that they had to resist tyrants as they faithfully served God. It was these brave psalm singers that the reason we have our inheritance as a nation. Now, the recommendation. Buy a psalter. Let me be more specific. Desire the Psalms and excellent hymns, and to that end, let me recommend the Cantus Christi. The Cantus Christi is what we use in our home and in our church. May God be glorified as we take up his psalms.
Hey, what's up? You still have another set?
I'm taking my son home.
I can't believe you, Dad. You're embarrassing me in front of the pastor.
Mr. Hill, you just don't get it. This is how we testify.
Raise him!
Ugh. Can't you see you're not making Christianity better? You're just making rock and roll worse.
Thanks for staying to the end. Leave a comment, good or bad. No worries, I have thick skin. Subscribe and pass it on. Attached, you'll find links to our ministries.